It was a holiday season, and the world's biggest passenger aircraft, Airbus 380, had just took off from New York to Bangkok, Thailand with more than 400 passengers at 8 a.m. Unlike the days before, where a lot of flights were severely delayed, today's flights were just slightly delayed. Everyone on board was happy and were looking forward for their vacation in Bangkok. There will be a 3-hour stop at London Heathrow Airport, so everyone was also excited to take a peek of London even though it's just gonna be within the airport. About an hour after takeoff, it was breakfast time. Everyone from first class to economy class was anxiously waiting for the cabin crews to approach them for the meals. After breakfast, every passengers had their own ways of enjoying the flight. Some were enjoying their in-flight entertainment, some were reading, talking, or just daytime sleeping. The flight was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when one of the passengers in first floor economy class called the cabin crew. When the female cabin crew arrived, she was horrified. A passenger on the aisle seat was seen limping in his seat. Blood came running down from his nose and eyes. His eyes were completely black. His female companion was seen panicking, and the passengers beside them were even more panicked. The cabin crews held a meeting at the galley, discussing on how to handle the matter. They realized that this is no ordinary sickness. It was decided that they need to isolate the passenger and his companion at the rear end of the economy class the best they can. The flight was almost full, so the cabin crew had to make extra efforts to move many of the economy passengers at the back to their new allocations a bit forward. And obviously, those passengers wanted to sit as far away as possible from the sick one. The cabin crew moved quickly to disinfect the seat used by the sick passenger. After the cabin crew isolated 2 passengers, another passenger fell sick with the same symptoms. All cabin crews were wearing medical masks and gloves, but only a handful of passengers do on their own. The captain was notified. He decided to keep going to London as there were no nearby airport to drop off the sick passengers, and the flight was already more than halfway through. Soon, more passengers fell sick. The rearmost economy seats that were free up by the cabin crew to isolate sick passengers were soon fully occupied, and there were no more buffer zone between the sick and the healthy. Then, things got worse. In a matter of minutes, more and more passengers fell sick. It spread very quickly, including children. First class, business class, first floor, and second floor were infected. Everyone infected had blood coming out of their nose, eyes, ears, sitting limp in their seats. Their eyes were totally black as if a demon had taken over their body. The cabin crews had put on their double masks and goggles. Yes, the airline also provided goggles for the cabin crews just in case of a COVID outbreak during the flight. They also distributed masks to all passengers. The cabin crew suspected food poisoning, but they had no time to investigate as their hands were full. The cabin crew bells kept dinging as more and more passengers called for them. There were a few doctors and a nurse among the passengers who volunteered to help the cabin crew. All the doctors suspected the sickness could be Ebola, but the total black eyes were not one of Ebola's symptoms. With no adequate equipment and confined space, there's nothing much they can do other than telling the captain to land the airplane as quickly as possible. At first, the captain wanted to fly all the way through to London, but after being updated, he decided to go to Dublin. However, Dublin refused to accept the sick passengers because their hospitals were still struggling with the influx of COVID-19 patients. The captain had no choice but to continue to London, which is 1 hour away from Dublin. In the meantime, there were more and more sick passengers sitting among the healthy ones now. The healthy passengers demanded that they be moved away from the sick passengers. Those who were sitting on the first floor demanded to be moved to the second floor, and vice versa. But at this point, shuffling the passengers is useless. The cabin crew updated the cockpit and described the situation as a bloody flight. Soon after, it took a toll on one of the crews. A male flight's attendant collapsed and suffered the same sickness as other passengers. The news spread fast and the healthy passengers were scared and stressed. Some of them were crying, some were praying, some were writing notes on a piece of paper napkin as if the plane is going to crash. Some of them even took refuge in the toilet. First class and business class passengers were told that there will be no pre-arrival meals as cabin crews don't want to spread the virus further, possibly from food or meal equipment. 2 hours prior to arrival in London, 2 passengers died. The crews could only leave the bodies on their seat and cover them with blankets. In 10 minutes, more passengers died. The wailing grew louder. More and more infected passengers died by the minute. By this time, most passengers had to sit right next to a sick or even dead passenger for the rest of the flight. As more and more passengers were infected and dying, something of the unthinkable happened. The airplane hit a severe turbulence. The seatbelt lights were on since passengers began falling sick, but there were still passengers who were unbuckled. Belongings from the sick and the dead floated to the ceiling. There were even blood splatters on the ceiling. Emergency passenger oxygen masks were automatically deployed, but many of them were unused. Only the healthy passengers made use of them. When the airplane finally recovered, the cabin was in total mess. All things that flew landed on different places. Blood-contaminated blankets used to cover the dead passengers, and blood-stained tissue papers landed on healthy passengers. Those passengers were shouting and swearing. They tried to wipe out whatever they think might contaminate them. Those who still have a bottle of water tried to wash off whatever that touched them. An hour has passed. The flight became a little quieter. The still healthy passengers sit quietly. Some of them tried to speed themselves with the in-flight entertainment, and some of them glued their eyes to the real-time flight information as if trying to contemplate whether or not they could survive from this horrific flight. Cabin crews were no longer frequently seen around the cabin, but when the cabin crew bell dinged, they came. When the bell dinged, usually it's either someone's just got infected or dead. And the bell dinged quite frequently. On the ground, the authorities were prepared for the giant A380. It will park on the furthest tarmac. Buses were waiting, ready to take the healthy passengers. But the healthy passengers are not going home anytime soon. They will be quarantined and tested before they can be released. Dozens of ambulances on standby to take the sick. Body bags can be seen on the tarmac, and refrigerated morgue trucks are parked not far from where the giant Airbus 380 is supposed to park. And everyone on the ground were seen in protective gear or PPE. Last but not least, the press media were also ready, but their designated location were so distant away. Those who didn't have telephoto lenses can only bite their nails. Finally, the airplane landed safely and stopped at the designated location. The authorities executed their plan seamlessly. The final tally was, out of the 432 passengers, 212 passengers died during the flight or at the hospital. 110 passengers got infected during the flight, but they were not sick or showed no symptoms. Later, 50 of them got sick during the quarantine. 7 died. The rest recovered. The cockpit crews were not infected because they stayed inside the whole time. 2 cabin crews died during the flight, 1 more died during the quarantine, and the rest 18 cabin crews were categorized as healthy. In total, 222 passengers and crews died from that flight. Health officials later revealed that they have found a new virus that could be deadlier than the Ebola.